Our top focus here on Breakfast with India. After 8 days of political turmoil and violent demonstrations in Egypt, President Hosni Mubarak has announced that he will step down, but only after finishing his term.
The immediate push for this, the Million Man March in Cairo. Now, President Mubarak saying he will not be contesting elections slated for September. He made this announcement on Egypt's state television. This also coming under pressure from the US. In fact, President Obama said he's spoken with Mubarak, who recognizes that the status quo is not sustainable. But opposition leaders like former IAEA chief Mohammed El-Baradei say that's just not enough, that Egypt cannot afford to wait that long. The president should step aside immediately.
The protests have been manipulated by political forces. My first responsibility now is to restore security and stability of the homeland. I was not intending to stand for the upcoming elections. I asked the parliament to speed up the election procedures. I want to conclude my work for Egypt by presenting it to the next government. Egypt will come out of these circumstances much stronger than before.
Mubarak has been in power for 30 years. Protesters in Egypt not entirely satisfied with the statement that he made, saying they want Mubarak out now, that he's caused enough damage to the country and should step down immediately. In fact, thousands of people in the streets renewed their call for the ouster, demanding that a new government be formed. They were joined by opposition leader El-Baradei, who says Egypt cannot wait for 6 months for a new government. He also said that the US needs to reconsider its support to what it considers its longtime ally.
This is clearly an act of deception. It's a person who doesn't want to let go, a dictator who doesn't want to listen to the clear voice of the people. He is unfortunately going to extend the agony here for another 6-7 months. He's continued to polarize the country. He is continue to get people even more angry and could resort to violence. He just has to let go. And not only is going at best to be a lame duck president, he's going to be a dead man walking. And I don't really understand what is behind that, other than a further 6-7 months of instability, rather than prepare the ground for a new Egypt.
30 years he has been starving us, and 30 years he has been taking advantage of us.
The speech was very emotional, targeted at a good-hearted people, poor people who are in slumber. But you know what? We are awake now, and we won't accept this anymore.
This man wants to have a massacre in this country, which has been good to him and his children.
Suhasini Haider, our Deputy Foreign Affairs Editor, joining us this morning for more perspective on this. Suhasini, the statement we're seeing from President Mubarak, some saying it's a coordinated statement with US President Obama, but still not good enough for the protesters. And if they escalate their demands, analysts saying again, the military, we'll have to see what kind of role they play.
That's right, Amrita. In fact, it is the next 48 hours that are crucial. Because remember, those protesters on the streets in Cairo, they came out for what many are calling the Million Man March. More than 10 lakh people eventually gathering, according to some estimates. And now many of those hundreds of thousands of people out there say they will continue to stay in Tahrir Square, in other parts of Cairo, until they see Mubarak step down. They've given a deadline of Friday, that's tomorrow, and are expected to come in large numbers for prayers in downtown Cairo on Friday. So it's critical to see what happens with the protesters, but as you pointed out, even more critical to see what kind of role the military plays. Many are pointing to perhaps a tacit support from the military for the protests. For the first time, the military coming out with a statement, the Egyptian army actually saying that they believe that the protests were a legitimate demonstration and that they had no intention of opening fire on those protesters, despite their very, very vocal anti-presidential stand. So it will be critical to see whether the military makes that final push to make Mubarak quit his position straight away, or whether they're in fact going to be part of a smooth transition to the next president if they allow Mubarak to stay until September, which is what he says he intends to do.
Right, so Hassan, how do you view US President Barack Obama's statement, the US, Washington clearly trying to take a more active role in the Middle East?
That's right, Simi. Obviously, President Obama under a lot of criticism domestically for not having handled the situation better. Remember, Remember, Egypt is seen as the cornerstone of American policy in West Asia in many ways, because it is seen as that big ally that has helped out the US, especially in those critical Israel-Palestinian relations. It is a key recipient of American aid, about $1.5 billion a year. So this relationship very critical for President Obama to manage better. In the last few days, we've seen a flurry of activity. Remember, last week it was the Army chief who met with Joint Chiefs of Staff Admiral Mullen in Washington. President Obama speaking to Mubarak, then sending his own envoy overnight to Cairo. Frank Wisner, the man who in fact was once the US ambassador to India as well, is the man that Obama chose to go and meet with Mubarak, and we're being told was one of the key inputs that Mubarak took before he went on television and made that announcement that he would not seek a re-election. Straight after he made that speech, President Obama speaking to him once again. So clearly, the US very concerned about what's happening in Egypt, and very mindful that it has to keep a very close watch on the situation.